The program, you're watching Daily Politics on Trust TV. Now, the crisis plaguing Nigeria's oil and gas sector shows no sign of abating despite the federal government's directive to sell crude oil to the Dangote refinery in Naira. Concerns are mounting over the alleged failure of crude oil suppliers to meet domestic obligations as outlined in the Petroleum Industry Act of 2021. Now, in a recent development, the management of Dangote Petroleum Refinery and Petrochemicals refuted claims by the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission that it had facilitated the delivery of 29 million barrels of crude oil to the refinery. This standoff escalates amid allegations by Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man and the founder of the Dangote refinery, who has accused oil mafias of sabotaging the $19 billion refinery project. Adding another layer to the controversy, renowned investigative journalist David Hundeyin has exposed an alleged attempt by an independent non-profit organization, Dialogue Earth, to mobilize a smear campaign against the 650,000 barrels per day Dangote refinery, the largest, by the way, in Africa. According to Hundeyin, the NGO offered him $500 to write an article questioning the refinery's alignment with Nigeria's climate goals and the broader implications of increased fossil fuel utilization in the country. To delve deeper into this unfolding issue, we're joined virtually by investigative journalist and author David Hundeyin. David, good evening, and thank you most kindly for joining us on Daily Politics.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Right, a lot of Nigerians obviously hearing me mention the figure $500 would probably be thinking, what was your motivation for turning them down? Was it out of patriotism, or was it why didn't you want to partake in the smear campaign against Dangote?
So it's not uncommon for commissioning editors from whatever organization to reach out to a journalist, asking the journalist to pen some opinion column or editorial or whatever. I've been approached several times to do such work. If it aligns with the opinion that I hold, I do it. If it's not aligned, there are a couple of times I've been asked, for example, to go write some opinion about something that has little to do with me. So say Israel versus Palestine or something, and I decline it because it doesn't align with me. But I don't necessarily go public with that. Why I decided to go public with this one is that I could see very clearly when the brief was sent to me, and I shared screenshots from the brief publicly, that the purpose of this article wasn't just like a random opinion column about the refinery and how maybe the refinery doesn't fit into Nigeria's climate goals. It was much more sinister than that. The NGO that sent this assignment to me.
Yes, hello, greetings everyone. I hope everyone is fine. My name is Kwame Gonza once again, and it's Connect Africa here. So in the past, we have commented about this subject of neocolonialism and how it operates, of course. This channel has dedicated most of our time on teaching about the sabotage of African interests. And we briefly reported on the fact that David Hundeyin, came in and, reported, or, he came to expose the external interests which are attacking Dangote. And of course, when we spoke about Dangote in the past, and of course, what he said, what he called the mafias inside and outside, of course, including the international oil companies, many, of course, did not understand what we were talking about in the past. But there is a very important book that we mostly speak about in our presentations on this platform, which is very important for us to study. And that book is called Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism, which was written by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Nkrumah, in his book, especially one chapter which I would recommend everyone to read, is the chapter on the mechanisms of neocolonialism. So in the mechanisms of neocolonialism, basically what Nkrumah does is he summarizes the attacks or the means which imperialism uses in attacking the interests of the African continent, of course, plus the global south and other countries. And of course, in that, the NGOs are included, the economic means also are included, and that includes even the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and all these institutions, which we know very well. But Nkrumah does not stop there, actually. And of course, he speaks about also the fact that the military and intelligence of the Western world, because there's where he talks about Wall Street. All right, Wall Street gets its power from Pentagon, and its other organizations, Western organizations, of course. Like the intelligence agencies, FBI, CIA, Department of Intelligence Agency, and all these, organizations. Nkrumah talks about them. He talks about, of course, even religion being a means through which they go, through to attack Africa's interests and, of course, to exploit the African continent. And therefore, this gives us light that the network is expanded, including mining, including the media. Now we are seeing that it includes the NGOs themselves, the non-government organizations, which are in the West, of course. And most of these organizations, of course, they present themselves as organizations which have brought some good to Africa. They have come to speak on behalf of Africa, for the good of Africa. And therefore, this is what we are also seeing with David Hunde. Is just a classical example of what Nkrumah wrote about, about 60 years ago. This is what Nkrumah wrote about 60 years ago in 1965. So it is very important to pay attention, to what he's saying. But let us go back to him so that we can again listen to him and what he is saying, extensively. Then we will come back and do some sort of analysis on what he's saying. And of course, Nkrumah did not stop at writing Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism, but he went further on to write a book called Class Struggle in Africa, in which he also talks about the external and internal collaboration within the African continent. We have internal players on the continent itself. And of course, this also, David Hunde, he speaks about it, that we have internally elements who are aiding imperialism to thrive on the African continent. And so, aside just talking about these things, I think that it is very important for us as Africans to take action in this direction, to take action towards remedying the continent, from continuing to go into this direction, but rather to fight and redeem the interests of the African people and protect the interests of the African people. But let me go back so that we can listen to what he's saying.
The British NGO, it was the Africa office, which is based in Nairobi, that sent me this assignment. And I could tell from the way the brief was worded, it wasn't worded like a normal brief. It was very, very detailed. This is what we want you to write. This is how we want you to word it. These are the resource people we want you to speak to. This is how so-and-so should be framed. This is how so-and-so should be worded. And this is the so-and-so conclusion, pretty much, that should be reached. And the goal of that article, or the perceived goal of that article, was to create a narrative surrounding the very validity of this refinery, that essentially this refinery should not exist, based on Nigeria's own stated climate goals and the agreements that Nigeria has signed up to, be the COP28 or the Paris Climate Accords and all of that. And then most insidiously of all, most importantly of all, that the face that should be seen putting this opinion into the public should be a local face. It should be a Nigerian face, right? Because clearly they already knew exactly what it is that they were trying to say, right? Because a normal brief, they give you a lot of leeway to determine what you want to say. This one, there was no leeway. Everything they want you to say has already been specified. So they could easily have got some ghostwriter to do it. They could have put it out under their own name. They could have easily sponsored it in the Nigerian media. They didn't do that. They wanted a known Nigerian face, a local face, to put his name on it and then be the one who seems to be the one putting that opinion into the public. So people will read this thing and think that, okay, this is what David Hundeyin thinks about Dangote refinery. Meanwhile, it's not. It's what some guy in London thinks, who has paid David Hundeyin to put David Hundeyin's name on it.
Right.
Which, I mean, there's no way you look at that situation and think, okay, this is perfectly fine. There's nothing to see here. This is fine and dandy, and I should go ahead with this. So I went public. So I said, I didn't even feel like I need to explain this to Dialogue Earth. That's the name of the NGO. I didn't even reject it and be like, I'm not doing it. I just went public with it. That this is what this NGO sent to me, and this is what they're trying to do. And being that
binary trading, I always thought that it was impossible to make money there. But at one point I came across one
job. I'm actually a project manager in the energy space. So I actually work in the renewable energy space. So I have a sort of bird's eye view of this very issue. When it comes to this constant debate between fossil fuels and renewables, Africa doesn't have any place in that debate. That's the truth, because Africa contributes less than 4% of global carbon emissions. Africa suffers from energy poverty. So the problems that those who have coal power stations and whose air forces and armies generate more emissions than the whole of the continent of Africa, the problems that those people have nothing to do with the problems that we have, right? Our problems, our basic problem is poverty.
Yeah, so what he's talking about here is the Paris Climate Summit, of course. And of course, this to an extent, you have to blame our African leaders that they went and signed onto these Paris, climate agreements, of course, which were signed, I think, in 2018 in France, and they committed themselves to the so-called contribution to energy transition, this so-called energy transition. But when you look at it carefully, this energy transition says that you should transition, all right? You should transition from dirty sources of energy, which is non-renewable sources of energy, to renewable sources of energy. But in Africa, we have places whereby you look at a country like Nigeria, for example, it is a country of more than 250 million people, but it just has about 4,000 megawatts installed capacity of electricity, which is ridiculous. That it is small. It is very small. And you look at other countries, they don't have anything at all, right? And yet we have these hydrocarbons, okay? So when you say that Africa should transition, what should Africa transition from? Okay, of course, this is ridiculous. Then, becomes ridiculous. The only person who should transition is the countries which have been, polluting the planet for the last 600 years, because those are the major contributors. All right. So for Africa to say that Africa should transition from renewable, from non-renewable energies or hydrocarbons to non-renewable sources of energy, I mean, it is even apart from it being hypocritical, it is not even efficient. It doesn't make sense at all. In that it doesn't even contribute for Africa transition. It doesn't contribute at all to climate change in itself. All right. The people who have to contribute the majority is the United States, for example, because the United States in itself, the pollution of the United States military alone, because it has all these ships all across the globe. It's a military, the United States footprint, military footprint across the globe contributes to emissions of 3%. All right. Of course, some people have been saying 2%, but that is it. But Africa combined together, its emissions, they are equal to only of one institution of the United States, which is the United States military. So why not cut off, why not cut down and reduce down on the United States military so that we can reduce this? Why not the United States, for example, close its coal plants? Why not Europe close all its coal plants? But while they were saying all these things, Europe is buying a lot of coal from South Africa and taking all this coal from South Africa. So I think this is what David Hundeyin is talking about when it comes to, of course, climate change. That you have a single institution in the West, which is the United States military, is polluting more than the African continent combined. And yet they're telling us that we should not use our resources to provide energy for our people. And of course, this channel has been extensively talking about industrialization. All right. When we talk about industrialization, you need three key things when you're talking about industrialization. Three key things. And first of those things is energy. Without energy, you cannot do industrialization. Without electricity, you cannot do industrialization. Without transport, which we have suggested, and of course, which we have worked on, and we are working on even in the past, we are working on right now. You need a railway platform, like the African continent needs a railway platform, and you need a communication platform for the African continent. If we are going to talk about industrialization of the African continent, so we need to secure our energy. We need to provide energy to everyone, every single person on the African continent. So these are the problems that we have been facing. So if you're talking about industrialization, you need these things, and of course, you need the steel. This is another thing which he came to talk about, that you need the steel, and of course, you need and of course, you need cement, because you have to pour concrete. All right, all these industries you need them, but of course, you need energy to run all these industries, and you need to transport all these, and then you need a communication. This is what contributes majorly to an industrial revolution. And we have, this is extensively, our favorite subject, on this channel. This is my favorite subject, personally, as Kwame Gonza. This is exactly my favorite subject, because Kwame Nkrumah is one of I can say, my mentors. All right. The person, even though I was born way, after he died in 1972. I mean, Kwame Nkrumah is the one who has continued to guide actually the Pan-African, most of the Pan-Africanists, and what we are trying to achieve on the African continent. But this alone, our intentions for us to want to achieve something for the African continent in itself is not enough. It's not enough unless we implement and fight against, the representatives of colonialism on the African continent, because we know them. We know these guys who are representing neocolonialism on the African continent. So we have now to put our foot down and organize ourselves. And that is exactly what the organization which I belong to, which is called the Africa Continental Unity Party, is working on. All right. So these things now are serious. They are serious things. They are serious issues. All right. So, and we are seeing them before our very own eyes. Now, the events have jumped from Nkrumah's book from being theoretical. Now we are seeing them before our very own eyes. People are experiencing them. Because when Nkrumah wrote about them, some of the people, they said that they were conspiracy theories. All right. And even David Hudein here has said that some people, when you talk about these things, they think that it's conspiracy theory, right? When you say that NGOs, Western countries are sabotaging Africa's interests, a lot of people say it's conspiracy theory, all right? But now here is someone who has experienced it, and of course, even us, on such a platform as Connect Africa, when we talk about these things, like, people think that it's conspiracy theory, right? It's conspiracy theory. It doesn't exist. But now someone is really experiencing it, and is giving us even the receipts of what they sent him, emails and all these things, and what they told him, how much they say they want to pay him. And of course, he's showing it to us. So now this goes to show us that what we are talking about actually is the right thing. Now, what we need is, we need the courage of our people across the continent and in the diaspora to come, so that they can rally behind. And we have to understand that we are at war. Our continent is at war, and majorly with the West, which has an interest in keeping us down as a continent. They don't want a continent to devolve, and they have agents within the continent, and those agents are presenting themselves as presidents. All right. So of course, this is where it becomes tricky. But then we have a mission to fulfill as a people, as Africans. We have a mission to fulfill, and we can only do it if we are doing it together as Africans. Anyway, let's continue listening to David Hudein, because he's just talking about the same things which we have been talking about here. At Connect Africa. If you look at our videos, all our previous videos, we have videos which talk about an industrial revolution. We have spoken about actually the fact that we are going through a third industrial revolution, even though in the West they have been saying that they are going through a fourth industrial revolution, and all these, the propaganda that's been going on, that there's some sort of fourth industrial revolution going on. There's no fourth industrial revolution that is going on. What is happening right now actually is called the third industrial revolution, and is happening in China. All right, the first industrial revolution, happened in Britain, and the second industrial revolution happened in the United States. You see, so the third industrial revolution is happening right now in China. That's what is happening right now. So the people like people like the founder of the World Economic Forum, what he is the one who actually coined that term, the fourth industrial revolution, and he popularized it, and he even published a book to say that, oh, the world is going through a fourth industrial revolution. It was not true. What was happening during that period was advance, okay, was a progress in only one sector on the globe, and that's the communication sector. All these things that we are seeing, which are called the artificial intelligence, all right, all this is progress within one sector, which is communication. Because what is the purpose basically of artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence basically is to increase access to information, all right, whether you're giving machines information. So it is only one sector that is making progress, but not the other sectors, currently. So if there's any industrial revolution that is happening, we are existent in the third industrial revolution. But let us listen, to David Houdin once again, and see what he's saying.
And poverty is caused in the modern world by lack of industrialization, lack of industry. And the two things you need for industry to become a thing in an African context are, number one, energy, number two, steel. It's as simple as that. Without energy and steel, you can't industrialize. So why on earth would anyone come to Africa and start telling Africans that we shouldn't do anything at all that is within our power to increase our energy security, being that the so-called renewable energy, even though a lot of it is still sort of airy-fairy, doesn't really exist, right? Even the so-called renewables, the technology that does exist, a lot of it is very expensive and very unreliable. It's not within our budgets, it's not within our purview. What we do have in Africa is a lot of cheap hydrocarbon energy reserves, a lot of it, right? So why on earth would we not be allowed to make use of our own energy? And then after we've industrialized, we can then start talking about doing an energy transition. Energy transition is you are transitioning from one type of energy to another. Not that you are on zero, you don't have any energy, and someone is asking you to do an energy transition. Transition from what? So that's the problem here, where I see a lot of foreign eyes and foreign sensibilities and foreign opinions making their way into our local discourse in Nigeria and in Africa. And our problems are not their problems.
Right.
But the unfortunate thing about civil society, as I'm sure you're aware, is that because civil society is almost entirely funded from abroad. It's funded from Europe, it's funded from the US, it's funded from the UK, it's funded from basically the developed world.
Yeah,
So you can see what basically David Houdin is talking about here, the fact that African civil society is funded from the West. Actually, what he's trying to put out is the fact that African society has been captured, right? And the capture of African civil society happened, in 1966, after the overthrow of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. That is what basically happened. That this capture of the political space led to the capture of Africa's civil society. All right. So there was some sort of social engineering which was enforced on the African continent, that the neoliberal order, as you all know, that Francis Fukuyama, of course, would come later on and write a book called At the End of History. And in the end of history, he claimed that the West has taken over, right? Therefore, there's not going to be any political system. There's no political system that is superior to the West. Therefore, it's going to be universal all over. And we saw these, people like George Bush in the 1960s talking about the New World Order. Because in the New World Order, George Bush, what he meant was the fact that they are instituting a political system across the world, and everyone must acquiesce to that political system. All African countries now, they were taken into that. If you look at all the African countries, actually majority of the African countries, or even all, they bought into this lie, all right, with this lie of the West. Okay, so African society now was engineered in some way, all right. African society was engineered, and so the social space was taken over, and that is what he is talking about. After taking over the political space on the African continent, the United States came and took over the social space of Africa. In that, of course, the whole West working together with the West, because what he mentioned is that this so-called NGO is being financed even by money from the United States, right? Even though the NGO is based in London, okay, it has its offices in London, it is financed by the Ford Foundation from the United States. That's where the money is coming from. Now, I want to remind people, I want to really remind people, because you have to pay close attention to Nkrumah when Nkrumah is talking, all right? Let us pay, I mean, I'm going to beg everyone to go out there and read Nkrumah's books. Read Nkrumah's book. Read Africa Must Unite. Read Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. Read Nkrumah's work. Read Class Struggle in Africa. Read Consensusism. Read Nkrumah's work, I'm telling you, you guys. Because Nkrumah spelled out everything that is, happening. The capture of African society. The breakdown of African society. The capture of all spaces. All right? The capture of all spaces, on the African space, in the African continent. So this is what happened. Now, when you go to societies where I grew up from, societies like Uganda, for example, NGOs were everywhere in society. But when I was growing up, NGOs, and most of them, the American NGOs, right? So this is what he's talking about, the capture of African civil society, that most of African civil society has been captured by the Western world. Okay, and there's a friend of mine who's in the African diaspora. Of course, other people call themselves African American. Franklin Jones. I have a friend of mine, Franklin Jones, who served in the United States military. He has written actually a book called the Matrix, Black Matrix. I think it's called Black Matrix. But he teaches us about how the whites and the Europeans use social engineering. All right, they use social engineering to engineer our society. And because he served in Iraq as a Marine, he saw this firsthand, all right? And he realized that the methods that were used in Iraq, during the second Gulf War by George Bush II, those same methods, when he came back home to the United States after serving in Iraq, he saw that they are the same methods that are being used on the black population, and on the black population, not only in the United States, but also across the globe. And so this is what he's talking about. The fact that, these NGOs, they want to present a picture of the white man as being benevolent, right? Generous, right? But they don't show you the picture of how much the white man is stealing from you, of how much the white man is sabotaging, like your interests, your economic interests, and your ability to develop yourself and to industrialize your country and take care of your own people. Because let's be honest, what we need, we all know it on this continent, on this African continent, and across the globe, everywhere where there's black people. What we need is not help from the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank or from Western NGOs. This is really not what we need. What we need is we need to develop our countries ourselves, industrialize, and take care of our own people and take care of our interests as Africans. This is what we need. We know this, all Africans, that this is basically, what we need. But then if these people have come and take over, they have taken over your government and they have taken over your society, right? When they have taken over your society through these NGOs and they have captured your civil society, then you don't have a voice. Your people don't have a voice, all right? Because they have come in with these huge amounts of money, which is excess money from what they already have. Because let's be honest, these people have a lot of money. The United States has a lot of money. The Europeans have a lot of money. And besides that, they just print this money. They're just printing this money. All right? They're not like they are working hard. These people are not really working hard. They're not working harder than us. All right? But they're just printing this money and bringing it. And of course, destabilizing the whole society and conquering it. Keep the society divided so that the society cannot function. And this is what happened even to the African Americans. When we look at the African Americans, this is basically what happened to the African Americans, that they captured, society, after the civil rights movement and the Black Panther, and they destroyed society and introduced drugs in society, and they introduced guns, and now they made society dysfunctional. They left it leaderless, almost leaderless, because remember in the 60s, the African continent, and of course even in the diaspora, it was carefully led. It was very well led. We had leaders, we had real leaders, even on the African continent. But those leaders were removed from the scene. They were helped, from the scene. They were removed. They were cooled. They were cooled out. Some of them were killed by the same West. Then the same West would later turn around and say that the African continent is corrupt, is leaderless. And even our own people, our African people, they bought into the picture. Even up to date, you hear it, that the problem in Africa is the problem of leadership. The problem in Africa is squarely the problem of leadership. We have had this narrative, numerous times, many times. But is it really that we don't have leaders? It is not true. It is not true that we don't have leaders. We have good leaders. But what is happening is that the good leaders, they have created a system. The West has enforced on the African continent a leadership system that alienates the good in the African continent, and the bad are now into the system. Those ones who are serving the interests of the white man. And so we have seen this. I mean, look at Dangote. So one man Dangote, right? He wants to liberate. One man Dangote wants to liberate, Nigeria, all right, from energy poverty, right? One man Dangote wants to liberate Nigeria from energy poverty. Let's think about that. So can you really say that we don't have leaders? Can you say that we don't have leaders on this African continent? We do have them, because one man Dangote, Nigeria is importing close to $20 billion. Mind you, Nigeria is an economy of around $500 billion, right? $500 billion. So one man Dangote has built an industry which is going to liberate Nigeria. Okay, and Nigeria is going to save $20 billion or more than $25 billion, because this is how much is spent on importation of fuels. Now, can you say really that Dangote is not a leader, within the African world? And he has built cement factories all across the African continent, and he is saving the continent a lot of money from importing this cement from European countries and Asian countries. Now, can we really conclude that Dangote is not a leader on the African continent? So it is not true. So what is happening is that we have the leaders, but our leaders have been alienated from the seats of power. And now they have planted this narrative that Africa has bad leadership, Africans are corrupt, and Africans are like this, Africans like that. And this sticks. And all the time, the white man is seen, when he comes to the continent, is seen as this savior who's coming to save the people. This benevolent savior is coming around the continent to serve the people. So, and this is a tactic to engineer society so that the society can turn against itself, right? Its own interests. Society can turn against its own interests, and society cannot be functional, so that society will fail to function by itself and take care of its own interests. And of course, we know why they came here. For a long time, we've been speaking about this. The reason they came here was, one, raw materials, two, markets. And Nkrumah has written extensively about this in the book called Africa Must Unite. The reason why Europeans came to Africa is they came to seek markets for their finished goods, all right? And they came, they wanted markets, and of course they came to seek the raw materials, and of course the labor. They achieved all these things, but what they cannot achieve, at once, like how they took labor and generated capital, what they cannot achieve at once, and they need to hold on, perpetually, is the market and the raw materials. All right, because these things, they get depleted. The raw materials get depleted. You can take them and use them to produce certain goods, but you will need more materials. So they still want these raw materials. They still want the crude oil from Nigeria. Nigeria, for the last 60 years, has been producing crude oil, right? Almost 70 years, has been producing crude. With the 4 refineries, the Europeans have fought to have these refineries not function. Now they are fighting extremely hard to see that Dangote's refinery does not work. And of course, they are working with the internal elements. Now, here the question now arises: what do we about this situation? What do we do about this situation, as Africans? what do we do about this situation? Let us continue to listen to David Oden, and we'll continue to analyze his speech, and of course, try to align it with some of the things we have been saying here on Connect Africa, and the reason why you need to support this channel, extensively, because, as the Juma has said, we have covered this story of Dangote extensively, not only covering it, but also we have analyzed to you what is happening. We have brought to you even the attacks, which have not even been mentioned, the attacks from Bloomberg, the attacks from, from Reuters, all these organizations, even Fitch, Fitch gradings, okay? Ratings, Fitch ratings, these ones who are rating economies. All right, we have brought to you all the corners which have been used, including people like Tinubu himself, who has interest in the, in the Nigerian oil industry. We have brought all this. So this is the very reason I think that you guys have to continue supporting the channel. Thank you so much. But let's continue listening to David Huden and what what he's saying.
Let me pick up on
So
that.
basically,
Yeah, let me pick you up on that, because earlier in the day you tweeted, "Dear African organized private sector, the reason that your operating environment is always trying to kill you and you struggle to grow despite having a market of 1.4 billion of the world's youngest people is because nearly all of the think tanks, the policy research institutes, civil society organizations, and media in Africa are owned, funded, directed, or controlled by external actors who are trying to kill you." Talking about local private sectors operating in Africa. You say that the growth of the private sector in Africa and their success is not the interest of those international actors. Put it in layman's terms, especially as it relates to the conversation we're having right now with the Dangote refinery, because most Nigerians, since the Dangote refinery came on board, were thinking, listen, the promises were made that is going to be the panacea or part of the solution going forward about our energy crisis, especially as far as the cost of petroleum is concerned. Now, this drama is unfolding right before our eyes, even involving government regulatory agencies that belong to us here in Nigeria. So help us square the circle around how these international interests and government regulatory agencies are all a part of this problem that you're talking about.
So there are three major interests to look out for here. The first are the international private interests, and by this I mean the international oil companies and oil refiners. Now, as you know, Dangote refinery is by far the biggest refinery in the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region. Refinery, the next largest one, I believe, is in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. I think that's about 400,000 barrels a day. It's owned by Shell. Dangote refinery, by virtue of its size, has something that the economists call economies of scale, which means the more you can produce, the cheaper you are able to offer your product. So in an industry like refining, which is very high volume but low margin, every extra dollar of margin that your efficiency allows you to create is a very big deal. In addition to being larger than its competitors, it's also much newer than them. So its technologies are much more up to date, and it's able to refine much more efficiently than its competitors. So I was speaking to a contact at Vitol. Vitol is one of the world's largest oil trading companies last week. And this contact told me that by the time Dangote refinery comes fully on stream, it's currently doing about 400,000 barrels a day. By the time it hits its peak, which is 650,000, at least 2 oil refineries in Europe are going to go out of business. So essentially, you're going to have a player on the west coast of Africa eating the lunch of business entities in Europe, right? So bear in mind that this is something that has basically, in the 5 or 6 centuries of interaction between Europe and West Africa, the economic relationship has only been in one direction. It has been Europe eating Africa's lunch for 5 or 6 centuries. For the first time, an African player is about to start out competing European players, and they're really not happy about this. So that's the first thing. So those people are not happy with it. Then, in addition to them, you have the wider Western government and economic establishment, which very much likes Africa exactly. Africa's poverty is a bonanza for them, right? And here's what I mean by that. So most African countries like Nigeria, the basic economic model that they have is that they export raw materials cheaply and then they import finished products at a premium, which means that because you're always spending more than you make, because the raw materials you export, you are not the one who sets the price. It's the people who buy to set the price for you. That means that your currency is constantly depreciating, which is why in my lifetime, I turned 34 this year. In my lifetime, I have never seen the Naira appreciate before. It has never happened in my lifetime. In my lifetime, the Naira has only depreciated. For most of us, that has been our experience. It's by design because we import more than we export, right? That's the basic economic problem that most of Africa faces. Now, what a Dangote refinery would do in the case of Nigeria is that it will make it such that for the first time in maybe post-colonial African history, there will be a large African economy that actually produces more than it consumes. Because bear in mind that imported fuel is Nigeria's single largest foreign expense, which is incredible because Nigeria is also one of the world's largest energy exporters, and yet Nigeria suffers from energy poverty. So by removing that expense and making it such that Nigeria is only exporting crude oil or crude oil and refined petroleum products, that has already reversed that economic dynamic, which has always been of benefit to Europe and the US. When that happens, it has several other knock-on effects for industry across Africa. Bear in mind that where you have primary industry, so the three levels of industry, primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary is where you are exporting raw materials and cash crops. Secondary is where you're manufacturing. Tertiary is where you're doing services. So most of Africa is primary economy, right? Like Nigeria. So the thing with primary economies is that because they only export raw materials cheaply, those in the secondary and tertiary economies benefit from them because they get to set the prices of those raw materials. And then as they move up the value chain, they're adding layers of profit for themselves that we do not benefit from. So if you buy an iPhone today, for example, most of what goes into the iPhone, the materials, they are mined in DR Congo and in places like Kogi State, right? The lithium and the tantalite and the cobalt or whatnot. But we don't see any economic benefit from those things. The people who see the benefit from those things are the company in China, Foxconn, which brings all those parts together and manufactures the iPhone, and then the retailer in the US that sells to American consumers. So they sell an iPhone to an American consumer for $1,000, but maybe Africa, where everything that went into the iPhone came from, Africa makes maybe $50 or $100 out of that 1,000. So where primary production to secondary production, because Dangote refinery is secondary production, what that means is that we're no longer selling those raw materials cheaply. That means we're moving up the value chain, which means that those who benefit from that value chain that we are excluded from presently, they have less to work with. So literally our prosperity is going to be other people's poverty, and our poverty is other people's prosperity.
Right.
So that's
So basically, here what he's trying to explain actually is also happening in China. We were, in one program here analyzing the events that is happening in China and the struggle that is happening between the United States and China. And actually, people, and a lot of us Africans, we don't want to pay attention to global politics. I remember that we were talking about the United States here, geopolitical, the geopolitics in the United States. We are talking about the Republicans and the Democrats, all right, in the United States. And some of the Africans, of course, say that you should not spend time on those things, talk about Africa. But this is the thing. This is the thing. We were talking about the Chinese, and some other person again was saying that we should not talk about the Chinese, we should not talk about those people, we should talk about Africa. But here is here is something that is wrong with that kind of thinking. What is happening in China actually, when we were having this conversation about the struggle between China and the United States, we said that when Africa, also attains this level of development, right? Remember, also we are going to face the same challenges, because right now the challenges that China is having, their technology that they are trying to move up the value chain, this the third layer, okay, the third layer of industrialization, the third layer of development. whereby they're trying to move up the level of service to become a service-powered economy, all right, service-driven economy. And that means that they have to complete the circle, right? They have to complete the circle of development. And it means that all the other industries which the fully developed countries have an advantage in, China also has to take advantage of those industries, right? So that is what we are seeing. All right. Now, because China has started touching those industries and it has started moving up the value chain to the third level of development for its economy to be completely industrialized, right? With some of the most advanced technologies. We hear about President Xi Jinping is development China 2025, whereby he said that there's going to be high value development in China. Okay, we see now China trying to manufacture its semiconductors. And this is what has angered the United States, of course. We see China now leading in the manufacture of automobiles, right? And we see this has angered the United States. It has put 100% now tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, which are supposed to come into the United States. If any vehicle is supposed to come in China, of course, this is to block, it's supposed to come into the United States, it's supposed to have a tariff of 100%. Now, this is to block the Chinese from selling their vehicles into the United States. We see the semiconductors. We saw the Donald Trump regime, all right, the Republicans. A lot of sanctions on China and the telecom industry. Why? Because Huawei was overtaking the Western companies, and of course Samsung can be counted in that, because South Korea, of course, we know that is part of the United States, almost, is part of that group of the United States, supports the United States in every way. Now, when we go to, of course, the semiconductors, we have spoken about it. We have spoken about the automobile industry, the fact that China now has overtaken them. Now, there is also the aircraft industry, right? China has launched, now it has about 7 aircraft, its own aircraft, which are in service. This industry has been monopolized for almost close to 100 years by the United States and Europe, Airbus and Boeing. And of course, we have some other small players like Embraer. We have Russia, but Russia has not, extensively commercialized its aircraft, even though it has some really nice aircraft, like the Tupolevs and the Sukhoi and the Ilyushin. Sukhoi Superjet, for example, is a very good aircraft. But China has been able to move up, is trying to move up with the force. But now the United States sees this as a threat and says we have to fight back and put them down, right? We have to push them down. So this, for us, we pointed out that Africa too has to learn from this, right? Africa has to extensively learn from what is happening with this relationship between the United States and China, simply because the way they are fighting China, they are going to come and fight against Africa when Africa also starts developing. And now look at us. We are just even starting just one level. We are just moving to the second phase where we want to, industrialize. And you have this huge industry. You have this huge, manufacturing facility, which is the Dangote oil refinery. And of course, which, David has already mentioned that it is the biggest in Europe, Africa, and Asia, right? It is the biggest refinery. All right. And if you could say that even all over the globe, because it is more efficient, is much more efficient compared to the other refineries across the world, even those which are the biggest. So what we are seeing is that this fight now, the same fight that is occurring between the United States and China, all the Europeans now, they are ganging up against Africa to fight in the same way. So this is what we were saying, that it is very important that we pay attention to what is happening between the struggle between the United States and China, so that we can also learn from this experience and know how to fight back. And of course, that involves even all of us as Africans, the ordinary Africans. We have to know how to fight. We have to know how to defend our interests, right? We have to know how to speak in the media and come out and defend these industries, because these industries, they are for us, they are for the next generation. And this money, because you cannot see it immediately, but it benefits you as a people, as a group, and it brings dignity. Above all, the things we were talking about is that we need dignity, because we have been oppressed for a very long time, and we have been disrespected, that we are not capable. We as a people, we are not capable. But here is an investment which is the single biggest investment on the African continent, that is the Dangote oil refinery. $20 billion invested by one man who sacrificed everything that he has, almost sacrificing all his wealth to invest in this, because he knows the ramifications of this investment. Now, this is going to bring so much value across the African continent. All right. So it is important that we pay. So the lesson here is very important, that we pay attention to geopolitics as Africans. We have to pay attention, because we are part of this global village as Africans. So we have to pay attention to geopolitics, whether we want it or not. We have to, so that we can learn how to fight. All right, so that we can learn how to fight, not just to fight anyhow, but to fight for our interests as Africans, to defend our own interests. Because this man is not related. This guy is not even staying in Nigeria. He's staying in Europe. He's staying anywhere. All right, maybe he's staying in the United States. I think he's staying in Canada or something. But he's fighting, right? He's fighting for Dangote, because he knows that this is part of us. It belongs to us. This investment is for all of us. So whether you are African American, it is okay. Whether you call yourself African American, we know, of course, some of us are Pan-Africanists. We know that you are an African. But the thing is, this Dangote investment, it belongs to you too, because this is a part of us. It is part of our dignity. It is part of us redeeming our dignity as a people, as Africans, because we have been disrespected for a long time, that we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do that. But now when we do it, then they want to fight against it. They want to fight against it. So this is, and of course, the problem. This is, of course, the problem that we are facing as Africans, and we have to know how to defend ourselves.
The sort of paradox that we exist in. That's the problem. Right. That's why some people are not happy with it. Yeah. And then, of course, you have within the Nigerian government, you have people who, unfortunately, are being, I don't want to use the term controlled, but are being heavily influenced by external actors. So you have people in the Nigerian government, powerful people in the Nigerian government, who are not acting in the interests of Nigeria as a sovereign entity, because they have other economic interests that are controlling them from outside the country. So then you have issues like where I think it was the NUPRC spokesperson who came out a few weeks ago and made a few comments that were incredible for a regulator to make about a private business in Nigeria. So he said one person shouldn't control the energy market of 200 million people, which is true. But it shouldn't be the regulator saying that, because it almost sounds like he's a competitor complaining about Dangote refinery. That's not the government's job. The government shouldn't be saying that. And if in front of TV cameras, that was incredible. And then basically also saying that the quality of fuel coming out of Dangote refinery is not good enough. Again, it's almost like the government is trying to discredit the private investments of a Nigerian, which again is incredible. So that just goes to show that there are certain elements within the Nigerian state itself who are not really aligned with the economic interests of Nigeria as a country, unfortunately.
Okay, just before we go, because we have less than a minute to wrap up, what lies ahead? Knowing what you know, having extensively covered this particular sector, what comes next? What is the next hurdle, whether it's for Dangote or for the Nigerian economy, to try to answer this very obvious, difficult challenge of having to navigate both domestic and external challenges?
We trade with Xness. Our funds are 100% safe because we know that.
I think what I expect will happen is that there will start to be very unnecessary logistical difficulties to actually get this thing up and running to the extent that it's supposed to. And I think Dangote has already started facing the refinery is becoming a huge issue. The NNPC is not supplying crude oil that it was supposed to supply to Dangote because it has basically mortgaged its oil production for the next 2 years or so. And Dangote is having to import cargoes from the US and wherever. So I think we're going to see more of that. And I think we're also going to see the international oil companies pulling out all the tricks in their book to try and frustrate Dangote refinery. You might start seeing cargoes having actual issues when they're on the sea. Things like this have happened before. That's how the oil industry works.
Right.
But on the flip side, so that I don't end on a down on a miserable note, I also think that when you start seeing things like that, and when it becomes very obvious to everybody that Dangote refinery is a threat to certain entrenched interests, I think that's the exact moment where the biggest opportunity exists to finally exit that primary level of production that we have been trapped in, because then it becomes more difficult to pretend as if this whole thing doesn't exist and it's a conspiracy theory, which is what people have done for decades.
Right. David, today, interesting conversation. Thank you so much for your insight and for all the good work that you're doing. We hope.
Yeah, so guys, that is it. That is the voice of David. But anyway, let me go to at least, let me read for you guys one chapter of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's 1965 book. I will not just read even the whole chapter. I'll just read a few paragraphs from Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's book, so that you can see what definitely we are talking about, and what David basically is talking about, what we have been talking about on this channel for a very long time. Mind you, when Dr. Kwame Nkrumah published the book, the United States actually immediately banned the book in 1965. They banned it anywhere, from being published. They banned it from being published across the world. Why did they do that? Look what Nkrumah says, of course, in his book. Nkrumah is saying that foremost amongst the neocolonialists is the United States, which has long exercised its power in Latin America. Famblingly, at first she turned towards Europe. All right, of course that was after 1945, after the European World War II, which happened, and then with more certainty after World War II, when most countries of that continent were indebted to her. Remember, what Nkrumah is talking about here is basically that when the World War II was ongoing, it was the United States which was funding this war, all right? It was the one which was selling the weapons. You remember that the industrial capacity of the United States, it was built during this period, that all the factories which were manufacturing vehicles were turned into factories for manufacturing weapons. So it supplied the weapons. So it became very rich, right? It was the one which was lending these countries which we are fighting, European countries which we are fighting this war. It was the one lending them money. So that's what Nkrumah is basically here talking about. So since then, the methodical thoroughness and touching attention, with methodical thoroughness and touching attention to detail, the Pentagon set about consolidating its ascendance, evidence of which can be seen everywhere, across the world. All right. So this is, of course, what Nkrumah is talking about. And who rules in such places as Great Britain, West Germany, Japan, Spain, Portugal, Italy? And of course, we know Nkrumah is talking about this. He's talking about West Germany, for example, because this period, West Germany, there was East and West Germany, so Germany had not been unified. But basically, the point here is which is saying, who is ruling? Who really rules? He's talking about who really rules. So there's this pictorial ruling, which we see people coming out, they are represented their faces. But Nkrumah is saying that the people who really rule in Britain, in Great Britain, who is the people who are making, laws over there, making policies, pushing policies, is the United States. Who rules in Great Britain? Who rules in Japan? We know that the United States has, military, packed in all these countries, Spain, Portugal, Italy. All right. So this is the problem. This is the problem that we are seeing even today, that the United States was a steel spring that even forces Germany to abandon the gas, cheap gas from the United, from Russia. And now Germany's industries have collapsed. The United States has forced Europe to abandon the gas from these places. Of course, who is in trouble then? Of course, it is Africa is going to be in trouble, because now they'll be running to Africa to take Africa's resources. Whose resources are supposed to be for taking care of the African people and the African people in the diaspora? Because the African people in the diaspora too have a share in Africa's resources. These resources are supposed to be taking care of the Africans on the continent, and they should be also taking care of the Africans in the diaspora. All right. So look at what Nkrumah is saying once again. Lurking behind such questions are the extended tentacles of the Wall Street octopus. Look at what Nkrumah is talking about. He's talking about Wall Street and its suction cups and muscular strength are provided by a phenomenon dubbed the invisible government, arising from Wall Street's connection with the Pentagon and the various intelligence services. All right. So this is what Nkrumah is talking about. Look at what he's saying. On the economic front, a strong factor favoring Western monopolies and acting against the developing world is international capital control of the world market, as well as of the prices of commodities bought and sold there. All right. From 1951 to 1961, without taking all into consideration, the general price of primary products fell, all right, while the prices of manufactured goods rose, all right. So this is Nkrumah's outlook of the situation, and of course, we can go on and on. He's talking about capital. He talks about, of course, the neo-colonial trap of government, the Bank of Reconstruction, and he came here and talked about the multilateral aid. Still another neo-colonial trap on the economic front, has come to be known as multilateral aid through international organizations, all right? International organizations such as the International Monetary Fund, the Internal Bank for Reconstruction and Development, known as the World Bank, all right? Known as the World Bank. So this is Nkrumah who's talking. He's talking in 1965, mind you, before majority of us were born, before many of us were born, all right? And this is the neo-colonial traps that Nkrumah is talking about. This is the neo-colonial trap, all right, that Nkrumah is talking about. So it is very clear, I believe, that to our viewers on Connect Africa, I believe that this picture now is more clear because we have spoken about this extensively. We have spoken about imperialism, extensively, because this, for me, is my favorite subject. And of course, unless you understand imperialism and neocolonialism on the African continent, you cannot talk about liberation on the African continent. The problem on the African continent is not corruption, is not tribalism, is not this and that. All right. Although these are somewhere, playing a part. Although these play a part somewhere, but the real problem is imperialism on the African continent. And to sum it for you, it should be even it should be the United Nations itself, a neo-colonial organization, said in 2021 that the problem on the African continent is the illicit financial outflow from the African continent. Close to $100 billion flowing out of the African continent. $100 billion out of only illicit financial outflow, right? This is how much profit the Western corporations are making. And the report by the United Nations pointed out that this outflow is majorly going to Europe and the United States. That is what the report pointed out, and is carried out mostly by the mining companies who are foreign mostly on the African continent, and the Western financial institutions who are playing. And of course, you can talk about Standard Chartered, you can talk about Barclays Bank and all these banks, all right? You can talk about all the other banks, so Big Bank, Standard Bank, all these are playing a part in impoverishing Africa, and they extract all this wealth by taking it from the continent and sending it to Europe and the West, so that the West can live, merry, can live, in luxury, while the African people don't have even access to water. All right. So this is what is happening, and this, of course, very much Nkrumah pointed it out during, his era, way back in 1965, and this is what we are definitely seeing, and we have dedicated, our time to explaining this phenomenon, because if you don't explain this very well to the people, since Nkrumah said that the best way to defeat neocolonialism is to expose it. That's the best way. That's the beginning of its defeat. Expose it whenever you see it. And that is what, of course, David Hudein, has done also. So I think that this is very important. He's a very good contribution, on his part. And of course, we want to thank you, everyone who has been watching. Continue to support the channel. Continue, continue to support the platform, continue to share with others. Please give us those likes. You are 35 people. I saw that you were almost 50 people at the top of the view. Please give us all those likes. Give us all those likes so that the video can be recommended to other platforms. We want to thank you once again for being part of the platform. Share with others, please. Invite others. Share the channel with others. If you are new to the platform, please subscribe to the platform. Please subscribe to it. And of course, thank you so much, Alfred, for supporting the channel with the super chat. Excellent. About $15 there. We saw $15 was contributed. And thank you to someone else. I think I saw someone else who contributed to the channel. Please, thank you so much. Somebody contributed. Let me see your name. Let me see your name, please. Let me see your name. Where is the name? Where is the name? Okay. There is someone. Let me see your name. All right. Somebody contributed here. We want to thank you, everyone who contributed in the super chat. Please continue to support the channel, even on our on our PayPal. Please continue to support the channel and continue to share the channel with other people so that they can come in and be part of this struggle. And the struggle is not ended. The struggle is for our generation. If you look at David Houdain, of course, he himself is also around 34 years, as he said. So the struggle, we are in this together. And thank you to Clean Black Sneakers also, who contributed. Thank you so much for the super chat. And yes, we welcome all the support that you can give to the channel so that we can continue doing this work almost full time and in a more organized way. Of course, a more organized way. We need to upgrade, of course, our broadcast so that they are more professional. So we will need support, any support which you can give us. We are glad to do that. And of course, I want to encourage you people to go out there and look for the Africa Continental Unity Party, the organization I belong to. That is where we are carrying out, a struggle, a very serious struggle for the liberation, of course, of the African continent. So I invite you to be part of the African Continental Unity Party and contribute to that. If you have any contribution, please do that. So thank you once again. Please share the channel, and I want to appreciate you once again. Be blessed. My name is Kwame Gonza, and the channel is called Connect Africa. Thank you so much.